Welcome. My name is Carlene Gardner, and I'm the director of Morsel, the McGill Office of Religious and Spiritual Life. On February 21st, 2020, we partnered with McGill School of Religious Studies to host a colloquium on the future of religion. This event came about as we hear more and more conversation about how young people engage, or not, with religion and spirituality. We specifically wanted to look at Generation Z, those people born between 1995 and 2015, especially since the older end of that generation are now the majority of our university students. So we asked ourselves, where will religion be when Generation Z comes of age? Will religiosity dissipate? If not, what will religion look like in the coming years? This colloquium included two panels, one on fostering religion and spirituality in early childhood, and another on how adolescents and young adults confront and navigate religious and spiritual experiences. Our first panel included parents, educators, and community leaders who play an important role in guiding children through religious and spiritual realities. Moderated by Professor Sam Nelson, our guest panelists were drawn from some of Montreal's diverse spiritual communities. Alphabetically by last name, our guest speakers on this first panel were Rabbi Boris Dolan, who is the rabbi of Congregation Dorchet Emmet in Montreal and a parent of 3 young children. He and his wife have been living in Montreal for the past 4 years. Next we have Dr. Juss Kaur. Juss is an active member of Montreal's Sikh community as well as a teacher, researcher, and educational consultant. A parent and a grandparent, Juss has been involved with Morsel for many years in support of Sikh students and interfaith dialogue. She is also a well-known artist and an author. Next we have Omar Edaibat. Omar is one of Morsel's Muslim faith volunteers and is currently completing his PhD at McGill's Institute of Islamic Studies. He's been an important mentor for the Muslim Student Association at McGill, in addition to raising his own young children. Next we have Hayley Juhl. Hayley is a copy editor and parenting columnist at the Montreal Gazette, and one of her articles on children in church sparked the idea for this colloquium. Having explored several faith organizations, Hayley brings a broad perspective to this panel, rounded out by her reflections on raising her 2 children, now aged 24 and 8. Finally, we have Reverend Jean-Daniel O'Donoghue. Jean-Daniel is Morsel's Protestant volunteer and an ordained clergy in the Anglican Church of Canada. A large part of his work involves ministry to children, youth, and young adults. He is currently pursuing his PhD in practical theology at the Université de Lausanne with a focus on children's spirituality. To start off our discussion, we asked our panelists to share any stories or anecdotes or surprising questions that children have asked them about religion. We heard from Omar, Jean-Daniel, and Boris on this topic.
In terms of my own experience, I'm a dad of 2 children. I have a very robust Muslim community organization that I'm involved in, so I'm here speaking as just a member of that community, the Sanad Collective. And we have a lot of children's programmings and activities. But I do have a little anecdote with my son recently. When I was putting him to bed, reading him his bedtime routine, his stories, he told me, Dad, I love you higher and more than God loves you. And I said, in my mind, that's theologically problematic. There's no love greater than God's love. But obviously I can't communicate that to him. As my spiritual mentor told me, when you speak to children, especially young children, they're all about emotions. When you conceive of theology, it's answers for the mind. It's not answers for the heart. Theologically, when we speak about theological creed, the nature of God, when we ask these questions, it's questions that relate to the mind. It's how we conceptualize God. And our mentor really recommends that we don't engage kids at that level. Instead, what we should be doing as parents is embodying the qualities that we want them to know about God, being ourselves channels of unconditional love, of accepting the child as they are, when they repent, when they acknowledge their mistakes, being that forgiving, merciful, guide and role model in their lives. So I just basically told him, I tried to put it in terms that or perhaps he can relate to better. I said, well, if you had a good friend and that friend gave you this gift that you consider to be the best gift in the world, would you love the gift more or the one who gave you that gift? He kind of understood. He said, the one who gave me that gift.
The risk of taking this to a level that's much less profound in some ways. I was teaching children's church recently, and a child asked me, what color is God? And I thought that was a fascinating question, and it's one that in our curriculum, I've been very cognizant about the amount of what I would call 40-year-old Norwegian Jesus that exists in Christian art, and how I really struggle to find artwork where Jesus looks like he's 30 and from the Middle East. And something that really struck me as I hit 30 myself was realizing not only does Christian art want to make Jesus look more ethnically like the artists, we're not comfortable with a 30-year-old dude being a religious authority, and you actually start noticing he's always painted like a 45-year-old. He's never painted like a 30-year-old. So I've been very cognizant about what kind of religious art. So I thought that this was basically asking the ethnicity or racial identity of God, and tried to say, well, God doesn't have a color, but explaining to a 7-year-old the transcendent colorlessness of God was not going well. And he finally just got really angry at me and said, but I'm trying to draw God. And he slid me the picture. And for better or worse, he wasn't envisioning God as humanoid at all, but rather as a vaguely octopus reptilian. Where I realized that at least however I answered this question, it wouldn't be racially problematic in human terms. But being an Anglican and United person, we settled on a rainbow octopus God. And it was the best I could do in those circumstances. Professionally, I do primarily work with what my church community defines as young, which means up to 30. So I do all the children's ministry, youth group, and university student work. And I think one of the things that occurred to me as my children kind of hit the tween years that was really essential to me actually was that I delegate two of the university students to become the youth pastors so that I wouldn't be their youth pastor. Which was about empowering those two young people in their own ministry gifts, but it was also this critical realization that I think I needed my children to have spiritual leadership that wasn't me, that they could have these bright young women who study at McGill as role models, and they could ask them questions about faith, and they could give answers that are officially heretically different than I'm officially a heretic. Even when you are a parent, even when you are in the community, there's a very strong need for community formation, that we follow God as a community. It's not just me, it's not just my family or just an individual. So making sure that I'm available to be, depending on the age difference, an uncle or big brother kind of figure for some people, but that my own kids actually have those people as well apart from me.
In our community, especially being in a liberal community, a lot of the adults and the kids have baggage from childhood about theology, Jewish practice, rabbis they didn't like, bad bar, bat mitzvahs, things like that. So one of the programs I do every year is working with the B'nai Mitzvah students, the people who are having bar and bat mitzvahs. So they're on the verge of being teenagers, which means I'm really tired at the end of the day. But I start out every year with an exercise that really is there to remind them that I'm not there to say, here's how I want you to believe, here's what you need to do to go through this process, but to remember that they're really in charge of their own religious identity and connection with the community. As I expect the answers every year, but we do an exercise, which I'm sure many of you have done. Step forward if you believe in this, or do this, step back if you don't. And in the midst of, how many of you like falafel, and how many of you like Justin Bieber, things just to catch them off guard, I say, how many of you believe in God? And every year, they expect me to be surprised by this. Almost everyone steps back. And we essentially unpack all of the baggage that they've built up. And what they realize very quickly is the question that they're answering is, what do you believe in? Tell me about what you don't believe in, but above all, what do you believe in? And it's not going to be what you think I want you to believe. It's not going to be what I believe. It may not be a man in heaven, but it's going to be something, a strength that makes it part of your identity. And it's a relief. Some of them say, well, I thought you were just going to tell me I had to believe in this and had to do this. So to put the power of belief and practice on them, I think, is really important.
And may I just note, as the Christian clergy here, that I don't believe in that Christian God either. But
yes, my most common answer to people's questions is tell me about the God you don't believe in. Not tell me what you do believe in, because unpacking first can often be very, very good part of the process.
We're very much about taking sort of Islam out of the box in a way that is kind of very relevant to the context that we have here, translating the concepts, the ideas in a language that is really accessible to the person who's born and raised in this context, right? It can make in our community people who are kind of very traditionally raised or have very kind of rigid conceptions of what Islam is. It can create a lot of tension in terms of but this isn't the way things are done, And so what we try to do very much is we're very much an intentional community, and we try to create very much a space in which people can just ask whatever questions, and we meet them where they're at. I do recall, for example, there was once this instance where a young lady was very drawn to our spiritual mentor's teachings online originally. She came and she visited the community, and she just fell in love with the community. She found it a very positive, very healthy space. And she started following the classes, but then she started to develop this anxiety because, she was not a hijabi. She does not wear the hijab, and everybody else, most of the women there happen to wear the hijab. And she went up to our teacher and she said, Sheikh Hamdi, she said, I buy into your teachings, but I'm really not there. I don't feel like I can wear this hijab. I would be lying to myself. And he said, that's absolutely fine. There's nothing wrong with that. I wouldn't ask you to wear the hijab unless you felt you were putting a crown on your head and you actually believed in it. But the moment that you actually feel like you're putting on a crown on your head and it's not this, stifling, oppressive thing, that's the moment that you can decide to wear it. Other than that, we're not a place of judgment, and we'll meet you where you're at. And no questions off limits. Nothing is taboo here. And you find that these relationships are fostered where very much the children from a young age are really encouraged to ask the difficult questions. And it's very fascinating for me to see that dynamic. And we also encourage, our community encourages a lot of interaction between the kids and adults. So you oftentimes find that the kids have several mentors. And it really makes me realize that it really does take a village to raise a child.
Next, we asked our panel how they've navigated questions that children have about other faith communities and religious beliefs other than their own, whether that's in their role as a parent or as an educator. We heard from Hayley, Jean-Daniel, Boris, and Juss.
That's a really big one in my house because my daughter has announced that she's Christian and the rest of our family is very much not. She's 8 now and she's made all these choices, and they're not the same choices as the rest of the family. So we have to have a very open discussion all the time about what you believe, and it's beautiful that you're in this space, but I'm not coming into that space with you. And then at school, when they learn about other religions and other beliefs, she'll come home and say, hey, this kid believes this. You like purple, and that kid likes pink, and you don't agree with that. But we have to live in this space, and it's just an ongoing conversation, and it's very, very gray. It changes every time it comes up. And keeping that respect, especially in a place where I don't necessarily agree where she is, and yet she's a child, keeping that communication going without putting my beliefs on her is very difficult, but absolutely vital.
My extended family is mostly divided between the three fairly odd as a combination groups of New England atheist, fundamentalist Baptist, and West Coast Mormon. So whenever we have cousins together, we have to have conversations about why that cousin won't go swimming in a bathing suit, why this cousin won't have iced tea, and also the odd juxtaposition of, in my extended family, despite how I may appear to you, I'm kind of considered the godless liberal one. Certainly I do understand the parents who try to isolate their kids from ideas that they're uncomfortable with, and I see people on the right and left doing this equally, and it won't work. So I think there's an inoculation that comes of just show them as much diversity in life as early as possible. Have the confidence in your own beliefs to share what you believe and why.
In our community, Reconstructionist Judaism is the only denomination that officially took out the idea of chosenness for the Jewish people, that we are not necessarily, in the traditional idea of chosenness, we are not better or have a closer relationship with God. There is now, Reconstructionism means you can reconstruct that idea to mean everyone has their own, is chosen in their own way. But so what's nice about that is both with my own children and everyone in the community, we can start with that basis of saying everyone can have this pathway to God, to faith and all of that. I think, in my own family, we started our children, I moved here about 4 years ago. They were in Jewish day schools, like all of the rabbis in town. And I realized this was not necessarily fitting our family values and how I think about God and faith. But what happens, and this is what I model for not just the kids, but everyone, when you're surrounding yourself by Jews, by Muslims, or by Christians, you can just take everything for granted. When someone who's not Jewish or someone who's not from your faith says, oh, you're Jewish, you're Muslim, you're Christian, what does that mean? That's a hard question to ask. So my son, when we took him out of Jewish day school, he actually became more Jewish, had a stronger Jewish identity, because he was having to explain himself on a regular basis.
I think also because of social media and technology making it so much easier for younger kids to find out about other religions, things have changed quite a lot. Now, those deeper messages, I feel, are becoming more stronger as a result of communicating with the younger generations, because they will not simply take it if you just give them one sentence or one something and say, this is how it should be. They say, why? Then you have to answer why, and you have to understand that why and have actually started embodying it before you can make it something that they will buy from you.
Something that Dr. just said that really resonates with me is when I teach children's church, the Christian doctrine of the Trinity doesn't inherently make much sense. It's been an ongoing dispute for 2,000 years. But I can say nearly anything to the adult congregation, and at coffee hour it's nothing but, thank you so much, thank you so much, thank you, oh, that was lovely, thank you. But I can't make the most basic theological claims to 6-year-olds without being ready to analyze and defend it. And it's beautiful.
Our next question asks about teenagers and how they organize themselves within the faith community. We wanted to know if there were youth subcultures forming that reinforced their engagement within the particular faith tradition, and more importantly, what exactly children and teenagers are looking for. Is it a sense of identity, a source of friendship and community, perhaps an understanding of God or life beyond this one? We heard from Omar, Hayley, Jean-Daniel, and Boris.
In terms of subculture and group, I do think as busy as many teenagers can be in their lives. For one thing, the narrative of the super busy teenager who's too busy with all their sports practices and instrument lessons, etc., is inherently extremely classist. That's not the reality for most kids in the city. Actually, a lot of kids in the city have nothing to do. So the idea that, we can't do a youth group because they're all too busy, your wealthy kids are too busy. What the youth needed, and what I do feel is a subculture church youth and young adult groups can offer that none of these arts groups, scouting groups, or sports groups do, is unconditional welcome. I was very involved in theater in high school. I loved it. It was better spiritually for me than most church things I attended. Yet, my welcome to be there was always contingent upon my excellence. I was welcome to be in the drama club because of auditioned, demonstrated competitive talent. Youth group is a place, ideally, and the only place I see this done equivalently well as many summer camps, where you do silly things. You play games you're bad at. You sing songs you're bad at singing. You do things with no condition of being good at them. And I do believe that's something religious community is uniquely suited to offer young people that, frankly, a choir, a sports team don't offer, because they welcome you based on how good you are.
I find, connected with what you were saying, honoring the reality of what it means to be a teenager, which is both wanting to fit in and wanting to be a rebel at the same time. Yeah. With the teenagers I work with, the main interaction I have with them is for our pre-bar and bat mitzvah program. And they come in thinking, I'm going to do this ceremony, have a party, get the presents just like pop culture tells me. And hopefully by the end they realize it's something much more. But what we do is, we do an activity where they see, first of all, by doing this, they are becoming part of the Jewish community. And they're doing also something, we talk about we actually start with a video from a First Nations life cycle ritual and say, you have this opportunity to do something that has been passed down through the generations. You're part of something big. But then we also have things where we talk about all the rebel Jews, of which there are many, the social justice activists, the militant feminists. And, they find this, hopefully this nice mix of saying, connecting with my faith community is a way of deeply connecting and being part of something bigger, but also saying, I'm not like everyone else, which is kind of what being a teenager is about, wrestling with those two things.
Finally, we wanted to know more about how our panel of religious educators and parents view the role of public schools in providing religious education. At the time this panel was held, the Quebec government was concluding its consultation on a revised version of the broad multi-faith curriculum that had been in place for about 20 years in our primary and secondary schools. We heard from Juss, Hayley, Omar, and Jean-Daniel on this topic.
Well, I was involved in some of the programs, like the MRE programs that they used to have, the moral religious education, when I was teaching at the secondary level. And I found that the courses were extremely helpful because I was teaching in a very multicultural school. What we tried to do with that course was try to educate all the students about who's who and what are they doing and what are they wearing and why they're wearing. You know, it ended up that we had a program which we called the Country Fair, where everybody, came and talked about, showed their cultural religious values and talked about it. And it became a beautiful environment, a warm environment, where everyone was able to be who they wanted to be without being afraid. Because in a lot of schools, even now, there is fear related of somebody else perhaps because they're wearing a turban. But if they are brought up in a culture where they're taught and made, to understand why and what is behind that appearance, then the students will definitely, and I have witnessed it in a school where it was really, really starting off with this atmosphere where everybody was just ignoring each other because they were completely different from each other. It completely changed to a place where they were proud to be who they were and to represent, because the others, they were coming to them and say, oh, so that's why you're doing that. That's really interesting. And, here's what I do. And they started sharing about it. And the most important thing that I found was that it also depended on who was teaching these things. Because if the teachers don't know about it, then they're afraid to bring it out on the table because they don't know what the values are. So it's about being there, being welcoming, understanding, and actually encompassing all of those things to become that one we are supposed to be.
It's very much based on teachers' experience, and you can get very a biased teacher where they're only teaching what they know, or they're just teaching something from a slide and here's a thing I think I know, and they're not getting anything deeper. I think it's great to have it in school, but without a set curriculum or without training the teachers how to teach these things, we're going to end up in the same place we're at now.
There's a greater conversation to be had that we're not having. It's our entire approach to religion as a society, and the government in particular. I think the government should not have a role in imposing a certain set of values on society, and I think it's not just acting as a neutral actor in this. There's this hermeneutic of suspicion that is the default when it comes to religion. So religion is this thing that is to be contained, that is to be managed, that is problematic, that has this exclusivist tendency that can tend towards bigotry, that can tend towards exclusivism, etc. And it's a problem that we need to deal with. The story is completely different when we look at religion from a hermeneutic of trust. That it's a force that can be abused for sure, but it can also play a very enriching role in society, enriching role in our personal development as individuals, that offers us real tools to cope with life's challenges, right? And that's, I think, where the discussion needs to be had. For a multicultural society to work, for political liberalism to work, we need to kind of tuck religion away from public discourse. That, we need to employ, public reason that is accessible to others without any recourse to metaphysical truth claims or without recourse to our own worldviews. I think that's incredibly stifling of discourse. We just need to be who we are. That's essentially, we just need to learn to be who we are and accept each other as we are, where we're at. And once that frank and open discussion is there, and you have space for that, as in these examples that you've provided, it's miraculous what the level of understanding and integration that can happen. But that discussion is never there. It's always stifled. So that's where the real issue is. It's not about the nitty-gritty of politics, for me at least.
Your comment about the hermeneutic of suspicion is relevant because First of all, as somebody who cares very much about the pedagogy of religion, I hate Quebec's existing curriculum very passionately. However, what does it say about religion that the solution to many of us recognize this curriculum as bad or problematic is to no longer teach it? Because we don't do that with English, French, or math, which are often taught atrociously as well. But we don't solve their poor pedagogy by saying, then don't do it. We don't need English, French, or math in Quebec schools anymore because many teachers are bad at them.
Thank you for listening to Part 1 of the Colloquium on the Future of Religion. To hear more from a student perspective, be sure to listen to Part 2 in this event composed entirely of McGill students. You can find links to this audio as well as recordings of other Morsel events by visiting our webpage at www.mcgill.ca/morsel. Thank you for listening.